We are Saul Albert and Magnus Hammann from Loughborough University. Our provocation paper argues that designers should stop using wake words and find ways to provide users with more variation, transparency and control over how they initiate interactions with virtual agents. We came to this conclusion after working through hundreds of examples of wake word use in our corpus of video using an Amazon Echo and related smart home devices in a home care setting. Wake words are a method for initiating interactions with a conversational user interface based broadly on the summons-response sequence that we're all familiar with from everyday interaction. Like other researchers studying conversational user interfaces in naturalistic settings, we noticed that users seem to vary the prosody of their wake word summonses in various ways. In our pilot collection of around 180 cases, we noticed that this variation was systematic and seemed to correspond with the position of the wake word within a sequence of action. In our corpus, rising intonation tended to correspond with initial summonses when Alexa was being spoken to for the first time in a summons response command sequence, sounding a bit like this.
Alexa.
Or like this.
Alexa.
A flatter intonation contour tended to correspond with repeated or second summons, where the first summons had been unsuccessful in securing the correct or indeed any response from the conversational user interface, sounding a bit like this.
Alexa.
A falling intonation at the end of the utterance, often with a stress on the middle syllable, Alexa, corresponded with moments where something was already happening. So a conversational user interface was responding to a command incorrectly, or music or alarms were playing, and the user would cut into that action in progress with an interjacent summons, sounding a bit like this.
Alexa.
I'll play a quick video featuring all these types in succession, and then I'll talk you through it. Here, Ted has an echo timer set to go off when it's time for his carer Anne to come in and help him. He'll use the wake word Alexa 4 times, initially to try to turn off the heater with this upward intonation,
Alexa.
then interjacently to turn off the timer alarm that starts up with this downward intonation and stress.
Alexa.
He then redoes the turn off heater command a second time, and there we get this kind of flat intonation.
Alexa.
And finally, he initiates a new sequence to call his carer Anne, and with this new sequence we get the upward intonation again.
Alexa.
Here we go.
Alexa. Turn off heater. Alexa. Off. Alexa, turn off heater.
Okay.
Alexa, call.
So why all this extra prosodic work from the users when, partly due to privacy concerns, conversational user interfaces don't process or make use of these variations? Previous experimental and survey studies suggest that users tend to anthropomorphize and to overestimate the capabilities of their devices, but interactional studies of social robots have shown that more knowledgeable users also simplify or talk down to systems they expect to be less able to deal with complex syntax and turn structure. We think this highlights a fundamental design problem with wake words. Wake words are simply voice-activated on switches disguised as complex interactional summonses, which sets unrealistic user expectations. And in the next extract, we'll show some of the consequences of this design problem, especially when there are multiple devices that use wake words in the same audio environment. Here, Ted is summoning Alexa when he means to summon Siri. We can see that because he's looking at Siri while saying Alexa and then says, wrong one, and shifts his gaze before summoning Siri. Neither virtual agent can cope with this shift in the target of Ted's summons, as you'll see.
Alexa. Alexa. Hey Siri.
I think you've got me confused with someone else.
I don't know what that means.
Alexa.
If you like, I can search the web for, hey Siri, I think you've got me confused with someone else.
In everyday interaction, a summons response sequence initiates a participation framework that enables us to do speakership and recipiency. we hardly notice that these are not simple roles. Speakers can, for example, embody the talk of another by reporting on their speech, and recipients may not be simply the person spoken to, but may include overhearers and bystanders. And indeed, in our corpus, we witnessed how when a disabled person and a caregiver are using a conversational user interface, that might give the caregiver the opportunity to overhear and then act on some expressed need, not spoken directly to them, but to the user interface. And we're working on a whole corpus of those at the moment. So the thing to remember here, at least for the purposes of this presentation, is that summons response sequences do a lot, much more than wake words. And when we use them and we draw on people's interactional abilities to use wake words as though they are summons, we imply all this complexity that simply isn't available to conversational user interfaces. That's why we're suggesting that we should find alternatives to them. Here are some of the references. You can pause and have a look through those. And thank you to the project team and to our funders and to Loughborough University.